When you're wandering the gardens at Alton Towers, you may spot an interesting, fancy-looking building not currently open to the public, but clearly with some former life. This would be Swiss Cottage, which I'm looking at today, so I hope you enjoy. Swiss Cottage was built in 1835 for the 16th Earl of Shrewsbury by Thomas Fradgley. He was a Uttoxeter-based architect, so local to Towers, and an example of his other work includes Uttoxeter Town Hall. At Towers, Fradgley was also tasked with expanding the main house alongside another architect called Augustus Pugin. Together they designed the additions of the entrance and banquet halls as well as other rooms. It was because of these large expansions that the estate started being known as Alton Towers, formerly known as Alton Abbey. The Swiss Cottage is a Grade 2 listed building and is one of 29 listed structures in the gardens alone, with the gardens themselves registered as Grade 1. It's located in the southeast of the gardens at the top of a slope, with a really lovely view incorporating many elements such as the pagoda fountain, the prospect tower, the orangery, conservatory, Stonehenge, the Dutch garden, and even more. Its location is probably partly down to it being designed to look somewhat like a lodge in the Swiss Alps, whilst also incorporating an ornate Tudor Gothic style. It is constructed from orange brick, and the stone plinth it sits on is called Hollington sandstone, with Hollington not being far from Uttoxeter. In its earlier life there was a thatched roof, but in 1864 it was tiled with Staffordshire blue clay tiles, at a cost of £3 and 5 shillings, or just roughly £200 today. It didn't have the outdoor terrace floor area initially, nor did it have the grand porch, and these didn't appear until much further down the line, but more on those later. The original intent for the building was as a decorative focal point in the gardens, but as to whether it was designed to have any purpose other than that is not known. So it could have been designed to be a folly. A folly is when an ornamental decorative building is built but with no practical use, so it literally is just there as a gigantic garden ornament. And as with many old follies, they often had a Gothic element to their style, much like Swiss Cottage does. Its possible origin as a folly is backed up by the original entrance being a small door in the side, which would be less likely for a grand building that's being lived in or used publicly, as they would have more of an official kind of central entrance out the front, perhaps, but who knows. At one point it was lived in by Edward Jervis, a blind Welsh harpist who worked for the 16th Earl by playing music in both the Towers residence and the gardens. When the Towers estate gradually became more popular with the visiting public, amenities were needed, and one was added in the 1920s when the Swiss Cottage became a tea room, a perfect location for a cup of tea and some cake. When the Second World War beckoned, it still served food and drink, but to the officers who were in training on the estate. Other areas of the estate taken over for the war effort include the area behind the Towers, which is the location of the World of David Walliams today. Once the war was over, its use as a tea room for members of the public returned once more. When John Broome, who we have to thank for turning Alton Towers into a theme park, did so in the early 80s, the Swiss Cottage became a silver service restaurant. It was extended as a result, with additions to the back and sides, as well as the fancy porch and outdoor terrace that I mentioned earlier. However, I did also read that there was some form of terrace back when the harpist was in residence, so perhaps there was simply an extension. One of the 80s additions was a commercial kitchen with a felted flat roof. When it was a restaurant, the Swiss Cottage had waitresses, afternoon teas, a fancy lunch menu, and it wasn't the largest of eateries, especially not when compared to the amount of people that could sit in Burger Kitchen today, for example. Apparently, in an 80s park guide, it listed the capacity as 100, likely with the terrace seating included. The smaller capacity would have given it a slightly more exclusive feel, as would the sitting outside on the terrace under an umbrella, looking over at the gardens. Darling! Its life as a restaurant continued until the 90s, and surprisingly I couldn't find a specific year. Although I couldn't find anything written down for sure in terms of why it closed, in my opinion this would have been partly due to decreased footfall in the gardens area as a result of the rest of the theme park developing further and becoming more popular. Whilst it might sound like a contradiction, lower capacity in the restaurant itself may have also counted against it, as increased visitor numbers may have also meant it couldn't meet demand for those that did want to eat inside. And maybe the powers that be just wanted to invest elsewhere in the park at the time. So, what happened next? After the 90s closure, it did become offices. However, the building is said to have been empty since 2013. It has also previously functioned as a venue space, but for what purpose, I don't know. And it's also been used for storage. Maybe when I went past, people were just in there storing away. But supposedly the storage use is more during the winter months. I wonder what they would store inside, and if it was anything super old or precious, the building would have to be properly watertight, secure, and ideally not damp. So maybe nothing too precious like archive material. There have also been previous behind-the-scenes tours when people have ventured inside, but this was back in like 2010 and, way back then. So I wouldn't mind doing that today though. In 2019, it was decided that the rear extension, the former restaurant kitchen, should be removed due to the felted flat roof having collapsed. Plans were also made to repair and restore the original elevation at the rear of the building, including restoring the rear door and window, as well as the walls and roof affected when the kitchen was added. Windows were boarded up, and as far as I know, as of May 2025, there are no official plans for the building, and I was unable to find out whether the rear repair works had taken place, other than the removal of the former kitchen extension in 2019. The proposed works are also interesting as they propose to restore the back of the building to its former original design, even though it isn't publicly used, so it's not related to safety, nor is it visible to the public, so it's not like it's a visible eyesore. So, what about the future of the building? In an ideal world, it would be great if the building could be used once again, either for events, a food and beverage unit once more, or even as some kind of scare maze, or even a mini museum for some of the archive. It could be a location for talks, or part of behind-the-scenes tours once again. However, with the financial struggles of Merlin and the cutbacks at Alton Towers very apparent to say the least, it's unlikely we would see anything happening anytime soon. I'm not even sure if further restoration work would be on the cards. But let's keep everything crossed that they do not let this historic, beautiful building become a ruin, or further neglected like some of the rest of the gardens sadly are. On a positive note, the Swiss Cottage has a Grade 2 listing, as I mentioned earlier, which should keep it protected to some degree, as well as the gardens themselves being Grade 1. It also sits within the Alton and Farley Conservation Area, and its location is part of a designated special landscape area. So hopefully with these measures in place, there is hope that at least the building itself will stay standing. And that's it. Thank you for watching/listening, and I'll see you next time.